Hi, welcome to Empower Her. I have a very special guest with me today, Melanie Morris. How are you today?
I'm very well, Priya. How are you?
Amazing. So, if you haven't seen any of my episodes before, basically, Empower Her is about uplifting women, empowering women through sharing stories of different women from different parts of the world, different professional lives, different personal lives, and the goal of the podcast is basically to have some relatable stories to share and then to listen to, and then also, um, listening to women's stories of, challenges, how they overcame them, and, so that you can learn from them basically and be inspired by them. So, Melanie, I think we basically came across each other on LinkedIn and I connected with her, and after that, when I looked at her profile, I was definitely interested in talking to her more about, what she believes in, what her professional journey has been so far, and things she has learned from her career. So let's get into it. And Melanie, let's start with just like a quick introduction about yourself with the audience.
Great. My name is Melanie Morris. I most recently was the head of people and culture at a very cool medtech startup in Ontario called Mimosa Diagnostics. I left there in March of this year and have been taking some time off to, get my bearings and figure out what I want to do and also spend some time with family. But previous to that, I was working at an organizational development and career transition firm. And I spent most of my adult career there. I started when I was 23 years old as a temp, and I left when I was in my early 40s. And that's where I kind of learned most of what I know about supporting people within their careers, whether they're exiting their careers, whether they're coming into careers, organizational change, leadership coaching. It was one of those on the ground kind of getting yourself immersed in that world of people. And as I grew up within the organization, I grew as a person who understands what, well, hopefully understands what people need to be successful in their work lives. I'm really passionate about um, helping organizations really connect with their people and helping them understand that their people are their most valuable resource within an organization. And if you don't have those, you're not going to be successful.
Mhm.
So I've recently started referring to myself as a people and culture strategist
Mhm.
because that is something that even to this day, even though there are a lot of leaders that recognize the importance of it in an organization, that sometimes they don't understand that their people strategy needs to walk in tandem with their business strategy as a part of it. So that's what I'm hoping to do in my next roles, or even as a consultant, is
Mhm.
to help, particularly on my heart, smaller organizations that are scaling, figure out how to craft their people strategy,
Mhm.
what things that are out there that are available from a people engagement and retention and what have you perspective, how it's not just a one size fits all. You need to decide what your culture is going to be, what you really believe in with respect to your core values, what your employer brand looks like, all of those sorts of things,
Mhm.
um, and have that walk in lockstep with a business strategy.
Mhm. Amazing. Yeah, I think that's really important. And obviously, I mean, we'll discuss this more in depth later,
Mhm.
but the field of human resources or people culture is, it has evolved so much in the last couple of years. And, the evolution that I'm seeing is definitely important because obviously, um, how companies handle their resources and, how they handle their employees and the culture as well. It's gonna impact not only like the employees, the people as well, but also like the company's growth as well. And so it's really important that, we talk about these things and how, we can make it better as well. So, talking about your recent role, what led you to that role in that company?
So um, I was actually friends with the CEO, Dr. Karen Cross, who's a brilliant surgeon and scientist, before she even started the company. And she met her co founder, and they decided that they were going to solve this problem in optical imaging, where there's a huge accessibility problem when it
Mm,
comes to light imaging and individuals with um, pigmented skin. So darker
mm,
melanin content, that sort of thing, where the majority of optical technology now, it is absorbed. The light is absorbed by someone with
mm,
darker skin versus someone
mm,
who's very pale like me.
mm,
There is optimal reflectance. You can take really good images and you can get good tissue health
mm,
diagnostics from that. So they invented, the two of them, they invented something that actually will work across the spectrum of skin tones to get good optical imaging. So I've been watching Karen do this for a few years.
mm,
And one of the key use cases for this device that they invented is for diabetic foot ulcers. And I
mm,
have a father who's diabetic who almost lost his foot a couple of times because his care wasn't managed properly. And also because he wasn't managing his care properly. So I became personally interested in this. I'd left my previous role. I was very blessed because I'd been there for such a long time that I had a substantial salary continuance.
mm,
My sister had had a baby, and then she'd had an injury that prohibited her from walking for quite some time. So I took time off to spend with my
mm,
nephew and to also support my sister and trying to figure out what it was that I was going to do.
mm,
All the while having chats with Karen, because at the time she was pregnant. We lived down the street from each other, and just getting to know her better because she was a friend of one of my best friends. So I knew her casually, but not
mm,
as well as I know her now. And while she was away on her maternity leave and she was visiting her parents, who live out in Newfoundland, there was this conversation that our mutual friend had had with the co-founder because they were looking for someone to uh, be the non technical or scientist person at the organization, because at the time it was two scientists and a bunch of coders and that was all they had. They didn't
mm,
have anyone who had any sort of business experience whatsoever, because scientists and coders, they don't know how to run businesses. So that they had received some seed funding, they'd won some competitions and that sort of thing, but they didn't have anyone who had any experience managing business type things. So when I
mm,
first came in to Mimosa, after a conversation with the co-founder and managed to charm him, he was like, "Okay, so this is what we're looking for. We might be closed by the end of the year, depending upon whether or not we raise funding." And that was a really big difference for me because I worked for this multi-billion-dollar company. And I was like, okay, so I'm going to try this. So I came in and I was basically a jack of all trades, a Jill of all trades for the
mm,
organization. So I did all the HR stuff, but I did all the office management stuff. The typical things when you're starting up a business. And we and some of that stuff included, connecting with investors, presenting on behalf of the organization. I learned a lot of science in a very short period of time, because the technology, if you understand the technology,
mm.
it's great. But if you're just learning about it and how it works and
Yeah.
those sorts of things, it's a really steep learning curve. So
Mm,
also acting as the CEO support person, because she was working as and like she was in Emerge, she was in the OR, she was doing this, she had a brand new baby, and she was the CEO of the company all at the same time.
yeah.
Yeah, she's an extraordinary one. Uh,
Exactly. Yes.
So for me, it was just like, I'm just going to get my hands dirty and help make this company
Mm.
successful. That was my goal. And then,
Yeah.
in 20, the end of 2020, or maybe it was 2021, and everything kind of all blurs together around that time, we had started to scale. We kind of rode out the beginning of the pandemic. In there was a lot of med tech investment in the front end of the pandemic, but it wasn't in things that were hardware based. So it was really hard for us to get funding, and we almost did shut down. And then we got a good round of funding and knew that we needed to actually move the device forward. We needed to be able to hire people, and to be able to do that and have someone to manage the people operations was going to mean that I needed to focus solely on that. So I started doing
Mm.
that in 2021, and it was where I wanted to be anyway. But being able to focus on actually building people programs, like all of these things that I was doing, but I was kind of doing them because I had all of these other things that were a part of my role. It was really gratifying, and having that sort of role in an organization that the organization itself is focused on bringing equity to healthcare, and then being able to build those programs internally, was it was a dream. Was it frustrating at times? Absolutely.
Mm.
But it was also an environment where we had a female CEO. Our
Mm.
co-founder was probably one of the most actually feminist men I've ever met.
Oh.
So it was a really lovely um, way to build something that you like, what you wanted to build. So there wasn't any fighting against existing
Mm.
structures,
Mm.
because we were just doing it as we wanted to.
Mm.
So unfortunately, the as companies grow, boards of directors can make decisions about how
Mm.
they want to spend their their
Yeah.
money,
Yeah. That's
and
right.
they decided to outsource HR, which is why I left in March.
Mm.
Um, and when I left, it was bittersweet, because
Mm.
I love the organization. I love the people I work with.
Mm.
And I'm sad that I'm not there anymore to actually bring this to the, like, fully to the marketplace. It's been in market for a couple of years.
Mm.
We were, building stuff in the States and what have you. But when I left, what made me understand the type of person I am in the work that I do is the messages I received from people as they learned that I was no longer going to be their colleague.
Mm. Mm.
And it was so heartwarming
Mm.
to understand that I actually do things that have an impact on people, and that the way
Mm.
that I operate in the HR space is very different than the way a lot of other people are perceived to do. Because
Mm.
there's a lot of this, like HR is only in it for the company and you can't trust them and blah, blah, blah. But I never positioned myself as an HR people. I did all the functional HR stuff in the background,
Mm.
but I was about making sure that the business was successful because their people were successful. And that was kind of my
Mm.
bottom line. And I think that really
Mm.
worked very well for that company.
Mm. Has your experience been the same with other roles that you worked in, or like other companies that you
No,
worked in?
I would say no. And because I was at that one company for such a long time,
Mm.
but it was a large organization when I started, and then it was bought by an even larger organization. And
Mm.
I, even at that organization, I had a real true focus on the equity and diversity piece, which
Mm.
was always so important for me. But one of the roles that I had at that organization was managing a group of consultants that would go to our client sites
Mm.
and support the companies as they were terminating people. So I managed the consultants. That's one of the things that I did.
Mm.
And the pool of individuals that we had to be those consultants were extraordinarily white because they were folks that were coming out of companies as they were retiring for the most
Mm,
part.
mm,
And at that time, so like mid aughts to mid 2010s,
mm,
a lot of those retirees were older white men and older white women.
mm,
Um, and it would frustrate me to
mm,
no end because our client populations weren't matching that
mm,
at all.
mm,
Um, and I'd try to find somebody who could even speak a language, because there are some organizations that have created environments where they hire populations that reflect their client base. I'm trying
mm,
to say this without specifically calling out a company. So so let's say, I'm going to say euphemistically as I can. So a very big bank in Asia
mm,
that here also supports an Asian population here. And
mm,
all of their tellers would only speak a certain language and that sort of thing, which I have no problem with because they're
mm,
catering
mm.
to their customers.
Yes,
But then
yes.
I would try and support these people who were
Mm,
being let go from this bank.
mm,
And because these people were here in Canada working in an environment that spoke the same language as where they had come from, they'd
mm,
never actually had to learn English.
mm. True. Mm,
So we were really struggling with finding folks who could actually communicate with them. And I'm
mm,
like, why did we sell this to the client? Because we can't actually support these people in the way that they need to be supported, because we don't
yes.
have any consultants that speak this language. So
Mm,
we need to look at this and
mm,
say, either we can't sell to this client because we can't
mm,
support them, or we
mm,
need to figure out how we are actually going to support them in a way that's meaningful to these people who have lost their jobs. They're in a country where most of these people speak a different language than they do, and they've just never had to because they were working in an environment that didn't require them to learn anything different.
mm,
So that was kind of like my first aha moment in,
mm,
like, we are not doing, as a career,
mm,
most of the people that work in HR typically around that time were women.
mm,
Most of the people that were retiring out of it were women, all white
mm,
women or white men. There were fewer men than there were women. So how do we in the front end make sure that organizations like I was working for are recruiting appropriately to reflect the candidates
mm,
who are in their population? But also, what is impeding a diverse population of young people from wanting to work in HR?
mm,
So that was something that I spent a lot of time thinking about, and actually going to the local universities, because I also did guest lecturing on terminations and change management and whatnot for a couple of the local universities and colleges. And we're talking with like the professors and recruiting there about what was going on. And they were starting to see a little bit more interest, but it was really, I'm like, this is something that you guys really need to be thinking about, because this status quo is not going to cut it. So,
mm,
and I think that started happening. Was I still in my 20s when that was happening? I think so. Um, so then coming to Mimosa and understanding that we needed to have our recruitment processes look a lot different than what I had been doing before in my previous organization, but also having that support,
mm,
because in the bigger organization, like, they set up a committee and I was on that committee. Did anything come of it? No. And what makes me laugh is that organization wins awards for their diversity focus. And I know how much more challenging it is, even if the organization has good intent, how much more challenging it is to shift perspectives, shift behaviors, than it is like where I was at Mimosa, where I was building it with people who were like-minded. And it was a lot more positive experience. And I found, for me, that even though it was a completely different type of environment, and sometimes I was like, do I know what I'm doing? I'm not sure. I was thriving there. being part of something smaller than I was being part of something bigger. And I think that's because of the size of the organization, but also the kind of people that I was working with. So,
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, just so because you mentioned about the committees a little bit.
mhm.
Yeah, I was just curious because obviously we've all seen those DEI committees in organizations. How does that work? Is it you select different kinds of people from different departments or different diverse cultures, and you form a committee and talk about some initiatives, or is it a very strategic kind of
Um, I think it really depends on the organization. And, I belong to this networking group of HR professionals called the People Group. Started in Canada. It's kind of moved to a global focus, but it's a Slack community where we share a lot of different ideas and supports and whatever on all sorts of different topics when it comes to people. And some organizations will specifically go out and appoint or solicit, and they have their like chart. We need to have this, and we need to have this, and we need to have this, and we need to have this. And then they put those people together, and it may or may not be successful. Organizations like Mimosa, we didn't necessarily have initiatives because we were so small for the longest time. So basically, my perspective was, how do we embed this from day one? How do we make sure that the people that we're recruiting understand our philosophies, that they understand what Mimosa stands for, like what is that employer brand, and how does it mesh with what we're doing externally from a marketing perspective just for our product. And that was really kind of easy because the product was based on bringing equity to healthcare. So let's talk about what equity looks like internally for Mimosa. So, working with the marketing department on making sure that that language reflected what our standpoint was that way. But also something as simple as I did most of the recruiting for a lot of the time that I was there, which meant that I was having the initial screening conversation with every candidate who applied for a job that we wanted to talk to. And from my perspective, I tried to make everyone feel as comfortable as possible because interviewing sucks. It's a terrible thing for people to have to go through. But also to make sure that everyone understood that they were valued as a part of the process, whether they were going to be successful in the process or not, whether that was me spending hours trying to make sure that I was pronouncing their name correctly. And if I wasn't doing that, to ask them outright. I want to make sure, and reinforcing, because so many candidates with non-Anglo names would say, oh, it's not important. That's fine the way you did it. And I'm like, no, no, no. Your name is important. So I want to make sure that I get it right.
Yeah, yeah,
Please remember, you are a human being. You deserve to get
yeah,
your name pronounced correctly.
yeah.
Um, and then these sorts of things set the stage for all of the other pieces that come along, so that you're doing less of DEI training as opposed to just making sure that everyone is walking and talking the behaviors. I remember oftentimes when we were working with potential investors and they were doing their due diligence with us, and they would want me to, explain to them what our DEI programs were. And I'm like, I don't know what program you want me to have for these 6 people, other than modeling how we do things and making sure that we're reinforcing those behaviors. And then I said, as we grow, it will be impossible to just operate it that way. But we have this foundation of individuals who work really hard to be as inclusive as they possibly can. And that wasn't just from, uh, uh, like racial diversity perspective, but that was from a we focused a lot on mental health. We talked a lot about um, how do we manage with neurodivergent employees, because in a small group like that, we had a remarkable number of those, and making sure that when we are interacting with our clients, that they are feeling as respected as possible, because a lot of times we were in hospital demonstrating product on patients and making sure that those behaviors were modeled all the way around. So I think by the time I left, we were pretty successful with that. Um, and also making sure that as we were recruiting, we were doing our due diligence about the people that we were talking to if we'd gotten farther along in the conversation, because we wanted an organization where everyone felt safe. So if I went out and it was a candidate that hadn't locked down their social media very well, and I saw behaviors from them that didn't jive with our values, then they wouldn't move forward in the process, because we knew that they wouldn't be safe for some of the existing employees. So,
Okay. Okay. Is that something that you would share with the candidate in their feedback? How does that work?
um, the only time that it ever really came into play, to be perfectly honest, was when I was doing recruiting for positions in the US, and we were using a firm that I didn't think was vetting people properly. So I wasn't in direct contact with those candidates. So I did not pass along that feedback, but I did give the feedback to the recruiter and said, this is why we're passing on this individual. Whether or not they pass that along, I don't know. But I mean, it was really in on the careers page on the website. It was very clear. Like these are the things that we're looking for in a human being that's going to come work with us. So back to your question about committees, they can play a really good part, because you want to have the people who are the basically the subject matter experts in those things and have that lived experience. But when you have a smaller organization, trying to do everything by those committees can be a little bit onerous on the employees, and you don't want to put the burden on a marginalized person. So you're going to do the best you can until you get big enough to be able to actually support initiatives.
Do you think when there's recruitment, interviewing, all those things, do you think there's anything that we can do better when it comes to, like biases? I know, there's been a lot of talk of like unconscious bias and, also, as you said, like finding the right fit for a company. Um, so are there any things that, these companies can do, or any people culture leader can follow some of these strategies to make sure that, they're following the right way to hire people?
Well, I think the first important thing is to start off with not knowing who it is, whose resume it is that you're looking at, because there's a lot of that comes in the first thing when you're looking at somebody's name, and you're like, and it doesn't matter how much work that you do to try and remove that, you're still going to have that initial gut instinct. How you decide to move forward is really what says what kind of person you are. But if you have that removed in the initial, and that first screening is based on the resume and qualifications, and then moving from there, and I think every company should do that. I also, as someone who has been looking at job postings for the past couple of months, there are still way too many companies that aren't putting salaries on job postings. And I think there is an element of that being, I don't know if companies are doing that because they don't want to commit to something and they haven't built their own compensation models yet. But if you are a company of, at least 100 people or more,
Mm,
you should have that compensation philosophy already fleshed out, and you should have something to work with that should be on that. Um,
mm,
and it does weed out a lot of people from a um, perspective that, there are people that aren't going to apply because they're just assuming
mm.
that it's not going to fit in their
Yeah.
budget or their needs or what
Mm,
have you. And it's not just, well, I'm just, it's very discriminatory
mm,
for all sorts of different marginalized groups. So I think that's something
mm,
that we really need. And I had thought, but I haven't really been paying attention the past couple of months, but I thought that the Ontario government was pushing towards legislation. I know in BC that they have to do it now.
mm,
Um, but here in Ontario, still, it's not
mm,
mandated yet, I guess.
mm,
The other thing that I think is really important is talking to, like, we had conversations
mm,
so with the hiring group, you talk about what it is that you're looking for in this role, blah, blah, blah. And if somebody comes back to you with a pushback that you don't think is a viable one, like, I think
mm,
it's the onus on whomever is responsible for recruiting to say, okay, so let's look at this candidate versus this candidate, and, like, talk me through what you're thinking here. And I was very privileged in that I could push back and say, I don't necessarily think that you are giving this person a fair shake. And I think it's because of your bias about X.
mm,
And we had an agreement. You don't get defensive if somebody points that out. You
mm,
listen to them.
mm,
And I think that there needs to be, and I know it's very hard because a lot of people, particularly a lot of white people, think, oh, I don't have any biases. I'm not racist about this. I'm not whatever. When it's
mm,
the furthest thing from the truth. The
mm,
more the more work that I do in this area, the more I learn that I just need to, like, be quiet and listen. And that kind of helps me understand, where the person who has that bias is coming from, like, what's driving that, but
mm,
also to kind of um, get them to look at things from a different perspective. So I think
mm,
that organizations need to have, in my opinion,
mm,
less DEI training for the
mm,
masses and
mm.
more for the people who are actually in the positions of power, so that they can
Mm.
start to unravel
Yeah.
all of the systems that have been put in place to um, encourage the behaviors that aren't
Mm,
necessarily the right ones, and
mm,
give people in positions of recruiting more power to be able to say, this is what you're doing here, without repercussion.
mm,
I think that's a big thing. A lot of people in recruiting positions have a lot of fear that if they call a leader out in an organization that is
mm,
exhibiting a bias,
mm,
that they will suffer consequences.
mm.
And that's the same, like, it's the same the world over, right?
Yeah.
For all
Yeah.
sorts of different things. But I think that
Mm,
that is a big step towards making organizations better in that process, and making sure
mm,
that they're hiring the right candidates for the job
mm.
based on their
How would
qualifications.
you how would you approach that conversation? Is it in a way where you sit down with that leader and talk to them openly, or is it if, for example, it's the whole leadership team that you're talking to, is it the best way to communicate that with them? Is it in a way like you present facts,
Yeah.
um
I think it
or
really,
yeah.
again, it really depends on the organization and the receptiveness of the leadership team to be challenged. And
Mhm,
I think that that is the hallmark of a good leader. One of the key hallmarks of a good leader is that, can you be challenged when it actually counts and not get your back up?
mhm,
That, I think, is a really big struggle, because a lot of times, you know, leaders of organizations have lots of confidence. right? And a lot of them are very self-assured, and they don't necessarily want to admit when they have maybe erred in some way. So if it were a large organization that I was just coming into, it may take a longer time because I have to work on building relationships with all of those stakeholders. If it's a smaller organization that's just starting out, I may be a bit pushier about it because it is a smaller group. Maybe you can have more challenging, courageous conversations with the stakeholders. But I think for someone like me who is older, it may be a bit easier because I want to do the right thing and that's my focus. Whereas someone who's maybe a junior recruiter may not have that same level of confidence, but also like the safe space that's created for them. So it's up to the senior leaders in people in the organization, if there are any, to make sure that that space is created where when it counts, you can challenge someone on their biases.
How much influence do you think people culture actually has when it comes to, first of all, recruitment, and then second of all, once any employees hired, their development? I know it depends from like organization to organization, but
Yeah.
yeah, working in different organizations, what has your experience been?
I would say if you have someone who is like a CHRO in an organization, that tells me that at least at some level, that organization understands the importance of the people function for the business success. If you have someone like a VP or a director reporting up through operations, that tells me that the organization doesn't necessarily get it quite yet. So the
Okay.
influence that those two differences are is like operations, they're more budget focused usually, right? And if you have someone who is at the C-suite level, who is responsible for the people functions, whether it's recruitment, talent management, employee experience, all of those different things, at least someone at that table is being heard about what the people experience needs to look like to ensure that the business is successful. And that's why at my last job, we just called it the head of people and culture because there wasn't like I reported into the CEO, and she understood that. But if there had been any sort of shift, would that be like what sort of different organization, where would they put that? And a lot of startups will put that people person underneath the COO because they just don't understand, or they won't have somebody. Mimosa was really unusual in the fact that they had a people person in so quickly, but that was because they'd hired the business person, right? Usually they don't come in until around, like Series A, Series B kind of thing. But they just happened to, have someone that had the experience in doing that. So, but it can be really tricky because even there have been accreditation organizations that have been advocating. There have been, like it gets talked about ad nauseum. And there are times where I just wonder why some organizations have, because they have to, but they have people responsible for the people in their organization. But they really, every time I see a job posting that is specifically half HR and half office manager, I want to tear my hair out. Because even though I did it, and that was a choice that I made. It wasn't a decision that they had made to create that role. But to specifically put it out there and say this is because HR and administrative stuff are two completely different things.
Yeah,
Yet there are a
absolutely.
lot of organizations that equate them as the same thing.
Mm.
So, and in a startup organization, you're always wearing a lot of different hats always. And it
Mm,
takes a long time
mm.
before you get to that. We actually
Yeah.
had one of the things that I did is we had a box of hats that I bought one time that was all sorts of different fun, different hats. And we had, like,
Mm.
and the one co-founder loved it because one of them was like a turkey and another one was like a little Robin Hood cap and whatever. And we'd name them. This is the hat that I'm going to wear while I'm
Mm.
doing this job. To help, because sometimes it
Yeah,
helps shift your focus if you have something
yeah,
physical to
yeah,
go
yeah,
with. So we had
yeah,
that box of hats. Mm-hmm.
mm. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
amazing. That's but yeah, I mean, yeah, I was gonna ask that because yeah, that definitely. I mean, obviously you're, saying that now, but I can't imagine that it must have been like a huge challenge because office management and HR, they, as you said, they're completely different, and they're huge responsibilities, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not something that it's like a very small kind of responsibility. No, it's huge. So managing both of those things must have been like obviously a huge challenge for you.
Yeah.
So how did you manage that? Was it a lot of organization that you needed or prioritization? How did you manage that?
Well, I have always been a very effective multitasker. And I know a lot of people say that multitasker isn't really a thing. But it used to happen, particularly when I was in like my previous project management role, where I was helping clients plan massive downsizings that were in multiple locations all at the same time. And I had to get clients out to different locations. One time I worked with this one client and they had 500 different terminations happening across Ontario at the same time. And I had to get like consultants out to all of those different locations across the province. And my sister was getting married in my backyard like
Wow.
days later. That
Oh
was
my god.
peak. That was peak insanity
Yeah.
for me.
Mm,
And then um a few years after I took the job at Mimosa, I found out that I have ADHD. I'm one of those late in life diagnosed women,
mm,
that was exacerbated by being in perimenopause.
mm,
So I learned that for me, there was a correlation between the amount of dopamine that I was able to like suck out of the world and being in constant motion and being on deadline all the time was an environment that I really thrived in because it was feeding my brain.
mm,
So figuring out how to balance all of the office management stuff versus
mm,
all of the HR stuff was a challenge for quite some time.
mm,
Um, and also being in an office because for the first few years I worked at Mimosa, we had locations. We moved a
mm.
lot in the
Oh
short
wow. Okay.
because we'd have a short-term leases or we'd have co-working
Oh,
spaces or those sorts of things
right.
because when you're small you got to figure out
Mm,
what it is that you need to do and
mm,
then and also like I loved working with them physically with
mm,
them but we had
mm.
things like Nerf gun fights happening. There was some people over there would be playing Pokemon Go, and I would
Wow.
be like, "This is chaos." And then I would have to turn to my boss and be like, "I need to work from home for the next couple of days so I can get things done."
Mm, mm,
Um, and then there was the shifting everyone home at the beginning of
mm,
2020, and once that kind of um, like got our footing after that, finding tools was a key thing for me and making sure that I had something that helped me figure out what it was that I needed to do and creating deadlines for myself and also reminding me of things that I needed to do because I wasn't remembering that I needed to do them. Um, but a lot of the at the time because there was maybe like 6 or 7 people, the HR stuff kind of was smaller than all the other stuff because we were writing investor proposals. Like, I don't know how many versions of the pitch deck that we had and,
mm,
doing on that and,
mm,
working with so-and-so and what have you. making sure that the CEO was meeting with the people that she was doing. I also did things like I wrote within 3 months of working at Mimosa, I had written my very first Health Canada investigational testing application. And what that is it's a request to Health Canada to conduct a clinical trial. But I had never done
Oh.
anything like that before. So I
Mm,
think that um, in that particular environment, it was because things were happening and they were always turning around all the time, that I maybe wasn't as effective as I could have been because there were so
mm,
many things that were happening all the time,
mm,
and so many new things. But
mm,
once I got into focusing solely in the HR role, it was a lot better. And
mm,
also, like, having the tool that helped me focus was also better.
mm,
And I described it to one of my colleagues once, and they're like, "Oh, it must be a lot easier for you now that you're only focusing on one thing." And I said, "Well, I said before I was wearing hats from multiple different designers. Now I'm wearing hats from the same designer but various lines." from
mm.
from
Yeah.
various collections. Yeah, because
Mm,
it was okay. So now, because we decided to put a focus on this, then there were all of the things that were within that all of a sudden became my
mm. Yeah,
responsibility.
that's
And
true.
we were in a regulated environment, which meant
Mm,
that sometimes you had to duplicate things. Like, you'd have the employee records and the HRIS, but then you'd also have to have similar things in our QMS system because
mm,
regulatory bodies required that.
mm, mm.
So,
Yeah.
mhm,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I think obviously the positive thing is that you learned a lot, during managing that office management and also HR as
Mhm.
well. So obviously you did a lot of things that you hadn't done before. So
Mhm.
it was like a lot of new learnings for you. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's something that it's always
All
good
of the
to learn
science
new things.
stuff was all the new stuff. And I did learn a lot. There were, like, more things that I knew about the people practices as I was going through it. Like, some of the
Mm,
functional stuff, like the
mm,
esoteric stuff was things that I learned in my previous role, and the people management I learned in my previous role because I had various
yeah.
roles where I was managing people.
Mm,
But the science stuff, definitely. And it just it was very gratifying working with such really smart people.
definitely. And would you want to do that in the next role as well, or do you just want to focus on people culture?
I would love to be able to focus on people and culture. I could do another role where it required me to do those things, but I don't think I would thrive as much as
Mm,
if I were actually focusing on the people, because that's where I get um, my energy from, is
mm,
making sure that people are happy doing the work that they need to do and helping. I think the other thing that I tended to be really good at was helping managers understand that connection between the strategy and the people, and
mm,
helping them learn to articulate,
mm,
like, and understand that they can't keep everything from their teams. Like, there are certain
mm,
things that not everybody needs to know, but if
mm,
it involves helping an employee understand what their contribution means to the bigger picture, and I think every people leader needs to be able to articulate that to each and every one of
mm,
their employees. Because if they
mm.
can't do that, then they're not going to be very effective at what they're doing, particularly
Yeah.
when times are not great.
Mm,
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Do you think with the new technology that has come in with people culture? So, for example, you have so many tools right now where in different companies that I've worked at, they had different tools when it came to like doing reviews and having like a one-on-one with your manager, and mostly they would follow kind of like a script, and they were doing like these one-on-ones and filling up these forms or using that tool. Do
Mhm.
you think those are actually helpful? Do you think, or maybe we need to use them in a better way, or is it more of a human connection that would be better? Yeah.
I think there is a definite use for the tools. I think keeping someone tied to a prescribed way of doing things doesn't necessarily work for every person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're not recognizing different learning styles, you're not recognizing different kinds of brains and abilities and those sorts of things by shoehorning someone into a specific way of doing things. And that's what I see often is, all right, so we're going to create some KPIs and you're going to have to figure them out yourself. But you're going to have some based on the business goals, and and then no, those aren't the ones that we want, like them. And then you go on and you have the conversation and the rating system and the whatever have you, because we have to have something tied to
Mm-hmm.
performance, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't see those as a motivator for
Mm-hmm.
every single employee. Some of you are like really high achievers that are really driven and can operate in that environment, sure. But then you have like really solid employees who do a good job for you year over year. They do improve. They're not interested in um, climbing the corporate ladder or anything like that. You have to recognize that it takes all kinds of people to make your
Mm-hmm.
organization thrive. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to look at performance. And I don't know if there's any organization that's figured this out yet, and I certainly haven't. But we need to have more conversations about like what sort of systems can we build that are more accommodating for all sorts of people. And particularly when it comes to like sitting down and having those meetings, because depending upon the organization, your manager may not have the time. So tools can help you have those conversations, maybe in an asynchronous manner, as opposed to having to carve out time for someone who is, the leader of an organization, has to fly there this day, and it's just never physically in one place where they can have that conversation with you. But how do you provide that continuous feedback opportunity for the employee so that they don't feel left out in the cold? Because I think that's a big part of performance, is helping the employee understand how they're doing, but not just once or twice a year. So continuous feedback, having these conversations also led by the employee so that they are in an environment where they can feel safe to say, this is what I'm struggling with. Um, this isn't what, like, I've really tried to make this happen. It's not working. Is there a different way that we can look at it? But those conversations may not necessarily happen real time. So one of the things that I think about a lot is that how can we use a tool but not make someone feel like they're burdened by the tool? Because that happens a lot when you got like your training platforms, and you've got your um uh like just like the things that you have to fill out just to even like get anything to happen, sometimes like HR ticketing systems and those sorts of things, and they take away a lot of that, like, I have to do this next thing to be able to still be an employee here. Okay. But if we want to have people feel excited about what they're doing on a continual basis and not just feel like they're there just to collect a paycheck, that performance piece has to be more exciting and interesting and fulfilling for someone, than just these are my goals for the year. I may have accomplished some of them, I may not. And also recognize that in this day and age, a company's goals may change during the course of the year. Like
Yeah.
it's not like it used to be where it's okay, this is the budget goal that we've set, this is the blah 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 blah. Like those goalposts are moving all the time. So you have to be flexible in how you're looking at your employees' performance, because at the end of the year, you don't want someone saying, okay, so I had these 4 goals, I didn't accomplish any of them, but I did this, all of this, and I did it really well. But I'm not being measured on that. I'm being measured on this, which nobody gives a crap about anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
I haven't
And yeah,
solved this problem yet, but I think about it.
Yeah, I think it's gonna take time.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's important to have these conversations because a lot of I think you've made a very important point is that every employee is different and every employee's growth is gonna look different. Every employee's career path is gonna look different, and I think that's where the gap is that whether it comes to like employees or the employers. I think
Mm-hmm.
both of them need to have like more knowledge or more information about it. And I don't think we talk about that enough. Is when it comes to employees, they kind of feel lost a lot of the time,
Yeah.
and they just feel like, okay, this is probably what success or my career path looks like, where I work at this job and then I get promoted, and then I get promoted again, and eventually I move from like an associate to maybe a director. But the reality is that that's not going to be everybody's career path, and success, or your career can look different. It could just be that you're just a subject matter expert,
Mm-hmm.
and you're happy in that, and you feel fulfilled, and you're learning and growing with that. Um, so yeah, I think that's where even employers struggle, or leaders or managers, where they're like, okay, when they talk about your career path with you, that's where they're like, okay, what do you want to do next? What kind of do you want to become a manager, and do you want to manage a team, and all those things. So I think that's where a lot of um, people need to learn on how career paths can look differently, because that's been like my own personal experience as well, where
Mm-hmm.
not it's not been a long time where I actually was like, okay, my career path might not look like this. It might
Yeah.
just be unique to me, where I just want to be like an individual contributor or something like that, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to necessarily manage a team in the future. um, so yeah, I
Because
think
not
that's
not
where
everyone should be in a managerial position, right?
yeah.
And I think we need to recognize that that is the thing. And how do we, and if we have moved someone into a leadership role, how do we make sure that they're really successful at it, as opposed to just saying, here, now you're. And there are some organizations that do that really well, and there are
Mhm.
other organizations that don't even recognize that they need to support their new managers who have not had any leadership experience before. So
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. um, so what do you envision when it comes to your career path in the future?
well, that's a really good question. Right now, I am hoping
Mm.
to find an opportunity, probably at a smaller organization that is very progressive and similar to the work that I was doing before. Also
Mm.
on a remote basis, which I know it can be challenging in this,
Mm.
but I relocated out of Toronto a couple of years ago, had the full support of my organization, and I
Mm.
have um, it's not it wouldn't be an easy feat for me to get back into the city. So
Mm. Mm.
so that's what I'm kind of looking for right now. The
Mm.
job that I had prior to working at Mimosa was a fully remote job for a large organization. It was quite progressive,
Mm.
actually.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and it just is the ideal for me. I relocated not because of the pandemic, but because I wanted to be closer to my sister and my nephew and my
Mm.
now niece, the ones that I'd taken
Mm.
care of all those years ago.
Mm.
And so yeah, so and the type of work that I'm looking for really is like being able to help an organization support their people effectively. I think
Amazing.
that there are a lot of companies out there that are struggling with attracting the people that they want to work for them. Young people of today have very specific ideas about
Mm.
the type of organizations that they want to work for, and they are not letting companies take advantage of their time for free. which I fully support. Um,
Mm.
but a lot of the traditional um, larger companies out there aren't necessarily recognizing that yet. There's still a lot of the, well, you've got a job, don't you, mindset. And I think that they're going to really, really struggle with that going forward. And it's not something that AI is going to be able to solve for them. So I think that any organization that is looking to create a welcoming, collaborative, supportive environment for their teams should look me up.
Awesome. Um, and then what advice would you give to, aspiring professionals and people in culture who basically are looking to make a positive impact in the organization that they're working in?
There are two pieces I would advise. One, don't be discouraged by the um, seeming trend of organizations to be getting rid of their DEI initiatives, or how the U.S. HR certification organization basically took equity out of their
Mm.
mandate and changed it into some other nonsense.
Yeah.
Don't be discouraged by that. It's not going to stay this way for very long, because it can't.
Mm.
The second thing is, as a part of your learning process, I would seek out anti-racism education
Mm.
from organizations that are led by Black, Indigenous, and other people from the global majority rather. Like, that is probably the most important thing I have done, is I take
Mm.
all of my learnings from those people, and that's my biggest piece of advice. If you're going to be
Mm.
successful in this and
Mm.
actually affecting change, recognize that you're not the expert.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. And the last question is, I usually ask my guests is, say 5 things about yourself that you're proud of.
Mhm. Okay, well, the first thing I've already talked about, and the thing
Yeah.
that I really am proud of, is that I did make such a significant impact in my last role. Um, I don't think I realized how important I was to the team.
Mm.
The one I'm going to out him, but um, when I was let go, because I live out of the city, one of the co-founders came up and did did the horrible. This is not.
Mm.
It's not fun
Yeah.
telling someone that they no longer have a job, but it's also not fun telling that to someone that you've really been in the trenches with, like,
Mm.
truly. And it was a very emotional moment for both of us.
Mm.
And that I will always be very, very fond of the people that I worked with. So that's one thing I'm proud of. Another thing I'm proud of is actually um, taking a role in a company that didn't have um, any business type people, and actually
Mm.
substantively helping that organization grow.
Mm.
Like, we went from 6 people to 32 by the time I left. And
Yeah.
the bulk of that happened in the last year and a half. And I'm really proud of every single person that we hired, because I think we did a really good job in doing
Mm.
that. Third thing, I wrote a um, uh, an application for a competition with Boston Scientific that made it into the final rounds
Oh,
of the
wow.
competition. And this was a scientific competition, but I was the
Mm.
only one that had any time to do it. So I
Mm.
collaborated with the scientist out of,
Mm.
where is he now? Oh gosh, Cleveland Clinic,
Mm.
on this application to use the device to help monitor neonatal infants who had this condition called low cardiac output syndrome. and it comes from being operated on in the womb,
Mm,
where
mm,
so in the for the like the first 48 to 72 hours, babies who have had prenatal operations can basically just stop breathing
mm.
or not get
Right.
enough
Yeah.
heart activity. So
Mm,
the proposal was to use the device to monitor the babies so that the nurses would get alert
mm,
sooner on the
mm,
oxygenation level in their
mm.
bodies. So I'm really proud of that
Mm.
because I'm not a scientist.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. Congratulations on that because yeah,
Yeah,
that is a big deal.
it is. I was like, oh, we got into the finals. Awesome. And that was just based on my writing alone. Our CEO took it further, but I was very happy.
Mm,
And then that turned into some good things, collaborative opportunities for the organization and Boston Scientific. What else am I proud of? I am proud of the decision I made to adopt my dog because I wasn't going to do that for a long time. And
How
just
long is it? How long has it been? When did you adopt him?
I've had her for have had her for 3 years this winter.
Okay.
She
Mm,
is just three, but it was just one of those
mm,
things where um, I hadn't adopted a dog during the pandemic
mm,
because having working in a startup that isn't fully funded is so
mm,
precarious, and I was like, I can't make this commitment because I'll feel bad
mm.
if something happens and I can't take care of her. Um, and then finally one day, because at the time I was living kitty corner from the Toronto Humane Society, I called my boss and said, I'm sitting in the lobby. I'm going to get a dog today. I don't usually make decisions like that, but I did.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
I'm proud of my niece and nephew. And I know that's not
mm,
about me, but because
mm,
I have had such wonderful opportunities to be a very real presence in their lives.
mm.
They're such amazing kids. We went on this walk in the woods yesterday, and my nephew, who's 7, just had to stop and tell us how beautiful things were all the time.
Oh,
And
that's
to
sweet.
have a, a kid who is like that in touch with his feelings and
Mm,
understanding the beauty of the world, and I
mm.
know that I am a big part of why he's like that. I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
amazing. I think,
Mhm.
yeah, that's why I always feel like you can learn a lot from kids because you sometimes as an adult, you just like forget about just like being present sometimes, and
Mhm.
kids can be, much more self-aware sometimes. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I love them both so much. They're both so different, but they are incredible. And he's like, we need to take a picture of this so we remember this day forever. And I was like,
wow.
I don't remember being this cool when I was your age.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't
Yeah,
remember
that's
it.
true.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's amazing. I think obviously this has been an amazing conversation, and we touched on so many important topics. So
Hmm.
obviously, I'm really thankful to you for talking about it so openly and sharing your experiences, and giving out your recommendations to other individuals as well. And I am absolutely sure that it's going to make a huge impact. And yeah, I just feel like this was a very important conversation to be had, and I'm glad we were able to do that.
I'm
So
very
thank you
happy that you asked me.
again for coming on to the podcast and talking about this, and I'm really excited to see what you do next and what your next role or is going to look like, and the kind of work that you're going to do, because I'm absolutely sure that it's going to be very exciting.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Priya. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you, and I will talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye bye.